My name's Mark, and I'm 30-7. I work overnight maintenance at the VA hospital here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. For 6 years, I thought I had the perfect marriage with my wife Elise. We met through mutual friends back when I was doing construction work. She was everything I thought I wanted. Mom was quiet, kind, with a good sense of humor. She worked hard and always seemed to have a plan for everything. I genuinely believed I'd hit the jackpot with her. 3 years ago, we had our son Jordan. He wasn't exactly planned, but I stepped up immediately. I loved that kid from the moment he was born, and I threw myself into being the best father I could be. Since my family's back in Georgia and we barely keep in touch, I put Elise's parents minus Ray and Margaret minus as Jordan's emergency contacts at the hospital. They lived close by, were always available, and seemed like decent people. They'd babysit regularly, came over every other weekend, and I thought they genuinely cared about our little family. I never in my wildest nightmares imagined that these same people would one day look me straight in the face and tell hospital staff that I wasn't Jordan's father. It happened 2 weeks ago, and it changed everything. I was pulling a double shift at the hospital when Elise texted me around 10:30 at night. Jordan's got a fever. Taking him to the ER now. I'll keep you updated. This wasn't unusual. Minus toddlers catch everything, and we've been through this drill before. I texted back that I'd try to leave early, and I managed to wrap up my work and clock out around 12:15 in the morning. I drove straight to Cheyenne Regional Medical Center, which is only about 10 minutes from where I work. When I walked into the emergency room, I went directly to the desk and told the nurse who I was, asking to see my son. She looked up at me, frowned slightly, and then said the words that stopped everything cold. "I'm sorry, but only immediate family is allowed in. The grandparents already said you're not the father." I stood there staring at her, thinking maybe I'd misheard. "What did you say?" She repeated it, looking uncomfortable now. "They said you're not the biological father. They said it would be best if you waited here." My first instinct was to lose it completely, minus to yell, to demand to be let in, to cause a scene. But instead, something inside me just shut down. I nodded slowly, turned around, and walked down the hallway like I belonged there. After working enough nights in hospitals, I knew how to blend in with the staff. Nobody stopped me or questioned where I was going. I found Jordan's room without any trouble. Elise was sitting beside the bed, and Jordan was asleep with an IV in his tiny hand. When she looked up and saw me, her expression told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't shocked that I was there. She wasn't relieved to see me. The look in her eyes was pure, undiluted guilt. "They were scared," she said quickly, her voice shaky. "They didn't mean anything by it." I didn't say a single word. I just looked her dead in the eye and sat down in the chair across from her. My stomach was in knots, and I felt like I might throw up, but I stayed silent. I didn't sleep that night, minus barely even blinked. For the next 3 days, I went to work and came home like everything was normal. Elise acted like nothing had happened, chattering about her day and making plans for the weekend. But I couldn't shake what had occurred at the hospital. Her parents didn't say that out of panic or confusion. That wasn't a slip of the tongue or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate statement. They knew something I didn't, and the worst part was that Elise didn't even try to explain or reassure me. That's when I decided to start looking through the house. I wasn't being sneaky about it, minus I was just tired of being blind to whatever was going on around me. I checked drawers, cabinets, old mail, anything that might give me answers. I remembered a conversation we'd had years ago about Elise keeping letters and keepsakes in a shoebox tucked away in our bedroom closet. I found it behind a row of winter boots and coats. Inside were photos, old receipts, and envelopes, minus the usual collection of memories that people save. But as I started going through everything, I wasn't just browsing anymore. I was searching for the truth, and I was about to find more than I'd bargained for. The first thing that caught my attention was a photograph of Elise with a man I'd never seen before. They were at some cabin, probably up by Casper or in the Bighorns, and they were holding hands. This wasn't a casual friendship or co-worker relationship, minus the body language was intimate, romantic. The photo was dated about 5 years ago, which would have been before we got married, but not by much. On the back, someone had written "Forever Yours," D in handwriting that definitely wasn't Elise's. I kept digging through the box with growing dread. I found for more photos with the same guy documenting different trips and occasions. One of them looked recent, minus Elise had the same haircut she'd gotten just last year. But it was the envelope from a clinic in Denver that made my blood run cold. Inside was a paternity test. The names on it made my head spin and my hands shake. Mother Elise Whitmore. Child Jordan Whitmore. Alleged father Darren Whitmore. Result 99.99% match. There was no mention of me anywhere on that document. No test with my name, no comparison, nothing. Just Darren minus a man I'd never heard of until that moment. I couldn't breathe for what felt like several minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I sat on our bed, holding that paper like it was burning a hole through my hand, trying to process what I was seeing. The child I'd been raising for 3 years, the little boy I loved more than my own life, wasn't biologically mine. And my wife had known this entire time. That night, we ate dinner like nothing had happened. Elise laughed at something on EV. I played with Jordan before bedtime, and we went through our normal evening routine. I was acting, putting on a performance, but I felt sick to my stomach the entire time. Every smile felt fake, every word felt forced. After Elise fell asleep around 1 in the morning, I carefully took her phone from the nightstand. She'd never bothered with a password minus another sign of how much I trusted her. I went through her text messages and found Darren work appearing 3 times just that week. I checked her call history and saw regular calls every few days. Most were short, but one had lasted 40-7 minutes. The timing was particularly telling minus the last time she'd supposedly gone to her book club. There was a call to Darren right before she left and another one right after she got home. I knew I needed to see this for myself. The next day, I called in sick to work and made the drive to Fort Collins, Colorado. It took me half the day to find the right house based on the address I'd found in Elise's phone. It was a small, neat place with toys scattered in the front yard minus clearly. This Darren had other children. I parked across the street behind a delivery van and waited. At 7:20-3 that evening, Elise's car pulled into the driveway. She got out carrying a tote bag and a bottle of wine, walked up to the front door and knocked once. When he opened the door, they kissed. Not a polite hug or a friendly peck on the cheek, minus a deep, passionate kiss like you give someone you've been in love with for years. I sat there watching my marriage crumble in real time, but strangely I felt more calm than angry. Maybe it was because I finally had confirmation of what I'd suspected. Maybe it was because the uncertainty was over, even if the truth was devastating. When Elise came home later that night, I was waiting for her on the front porch. I was in naturally calm minus to calm, probably. "How was book club?" I asked casually. She froze halfway up the walkway. It was fine. I nodded and reached into my jacket, pulling out the photograph I'd found. "Is this him, Darren?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Where did you get that?" "I know everything," I said evenly. "I saw the paternity test. I saw you with him tonight." Her knees almost gave out, and she had to sit down on the front steps. She covered her face with her hands and started crying. "It was before we got married," she said, her voice shaking. "We had broken up. I thought it was completely over with him. I didn't know Jordan wasn't yours until after he was born, and by then, I didn't want to lose you. But you've been seeing him for years," I said. It wasn't a question. I didn't mean for it to happen again. We ran into each other. I held up my hand to stop her. "You let me raise a child for 3 years. You let me believe he was mine. You let me bond with him, love him as my own blood, and you never said a word." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared of what would happen." "No," I said firmly. "You weren't scared. You were selfish." That night, I slept on the couch for the first time in our marriage. The next morning, I drove straight to the courthouse and talked to a lawyer that same afternoon. I told him everything minus the hospital incident, the photos, the paternity test, the ongoing affair. By the end of the week, I had filed for custody of Jordan. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't doing this to hurt Elise, though I'm sure it did. I was doing this to protect Jordan. That little boy didn't ask to be born into this mess of lies and deception. I was the one who had raised him from birth. I was the one who got up with him at 2 in the morning when he was sick. I was the one who taught him how to hold a spoon, how to tie his shoes, how to ride a tricycle. Darren might have contributed DNA, but he was nothing more than a name on a piece of paper. I wasn't about to let him waltz in and take my place as Jordan's father. Elise didn't take the custody filing well. At first, she actually laughed, like I was making some kind of joke. Then her expression changed, and she got quiet and cold. "You're not even his real father," she said, standing in our kitchen with her arms crossed defensively. "You don't have a legal case." I looked her straight in the eye. "I've got 3 years of being his only real parent. You want to let some man who has never changed a diaper walk in here and play daddy?" She didn't have an answer for that. I moved out that weekend, renting a small one-bedroom apartment near downtown Yen. I took only what I absolutely needed minus clothes, my toolbox, and a few framed pictures of me and Jordan. The court approved visitation rights immediately every Tuesday evening and every other weekend. That first weekend I had Jordan at my new place. He didn't understand why he was sleeping somewhere different. He kept asking where mommy was, and I told him that mommy was at her house and he'd see her soon. He seemed to accept this explanation, curled up in my arms, and fell asleep. After he was settled, I cried harder than I ever had in my adult life. About a week later, I got a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Mina asked Darren. I didn't reply, but the next day he showed up outside my apartment building. I was walking Jordan back from the nearby park when I saw him leaning against a silver pickup truck. He was tall, clean minus shaven, and looked like the type of guy who wore cologne to the gym. He nodded toward Jordan. Can I talk to you? I told him absolutely not. Look, I'm Jordan's father, he said. You're nothing but a name on a test, I replied firmly. He stepped closer and I could see he was trying to appear reasonable. I'm not trying to start trouble here. I just want to be part of his life. I stepped between him and Jordan. You were part of Elise's life, not his. Not yet, and if I have anything to say about it, not ever. He backed off, but I could tell this confrontation was far from over. Elise must have been the one who told him where I lived and when I'd be there with Jordan. The following week, I received a letter from Darren's attorney. He was filing for shared custody. My hands were literally shaking as I opened the envelope and read the legal documents. I immediately called my lawyer, who told me not to panic. He explained that the court would look at who had actually raised Jordan, who had been there for him day in and day out. Biology wasn't everything in custody cases, he assured me, but he also warned that it was going to get ugly. He was absolutely right about that. Elise completely flipped sides and started supporting Darren in the custody battle. She claimed it was only fair that Jordan should know his real dad. I reminded her that I was the one who had gotten Jordan through our SV last winter, sitting up with him for nights on end. I was the one who had spent 4 hours in the emergency room holding him while he got stitches after falling off the couch. I was the one who had potty-minus trained him, taught him his colors, read him bedtime stories every single night. She either didn't care about any of that, or she cared but not enough to matter. What I couldn't understand was how she had changed so completely and so quickly. Then I found out that Darren had moved into our old house minus into what used to be our marital home. Just like that, without any waiting period or adjustment time. 2 weeks after she and I separated, the man who had fathered her child years ago was brushing his teeth in what used to be my bathroom. The worst part was when Jordan started calling him Daddy D. That revelation almost broke me entirely. The court ordered a family evaluation, where a social worker visited both homes to observe how Jordan interacted with each of us. She spent 2 hours at my apartment and noted that it was stable and calm. Then she visited Elise's house, and when I read her report later, I saw a line that made my blood boil. Mother appears more emotionally comfortable with Darren than with the petitioner. So what? I wasn't trying to win Elise back. I was fighting to remain a father to the child I'd raised. The custody hearing was scheduled for the end of the month, and until then, everything was supposed to stay the same regarding visitation. But Elise was already trying to push me out of Jordan's life in subtle ways. One Friday when I arrived to pick him up, I found his overnight bag already packed with new clothes I hadn't bought, toys I didn't recognize, and even a different toothbrush. Elise came to the door with a fake smile. We figured it's time he starts having some things at your place, since Darren and I are going to be doing most of the parenting soon. I didn't say anything. I just took my son and walked away, but inside I was seething. A few nights later, something happened that changed everything. Jordan woke up crying at my apartment around 2 in the morning. I ran into his room and found him curled in a ball on the floor beside his bed. I picked him up and held him close, trying to comfort him. In a small, scared whisper, he said, Daddy D said if I cry too much, I have to sleep outside. I pulled back and looked at his face. What did you just say? His eyes were wet and frightened. He got mad when I cried at night. He said big boys don't cry. I called my lawyer at 7 the next morning and told him everything Jordan had said. He instructed me to write down every single word exactly as Jordan had said it, and to make a voice recording of myself recounting the conversation while it was still fresh in my memory. I followed his advice precisely. I documented everything, even though I wasn't sure how much it would matter in court. But I needed that record for myself to minus proof that I wasn't imagining things, that I had misunderstood the fear I'd seen in my son's eyes. After that night, I started paying closer attention to Jordan's behavior when he came back from visits with Elise and Darren. I noticed little things that hadn't been there before. He would flinch when I raised my voice, even if I was just calling to him from another room. He started wetting the bed again, which he hadn't done in over a year. And once, when I was helping him change clothes, I noticed a faint bruise on his upper arm. When I asked him what had happened, he just said I fell and looked away quickly. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Kids fall all the time, and they get bruises from normal childhood activities. But something felt wrong about his reaction, about the way he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. So I made a decision that I know sounds terrible, but I felt like I had no choice. I bought a small digital voice recorder and slipped it into the bottom of Jordan's backpack. I didn't want to spy on anyone, but I needed to know if my son was safe. The next time Jordan stayed overnight at Elise's house, I waited until he came back to my place. Then I plugged the recorder into my laptop to see what, if anything, it had captured. What I heard made my blood run absolutely cold. There were hours of silence and background noise, some casual conversation between Elise and Darren. But around 8:30 in the evening, I heard Jordan crying. Then Darren's voice came through clearly, loud and sharp. Stop crying. You're not a baby. Ador slammed hard, Jordan whimpered quietly, and then I heard Elise say, you need to stop yelling at him like that, Darren. Then you deal with it, Darren snapped back. I'm not doing this every damn night. He's just scared, Elise said. He's been through a lot with the separation. Not my fault his real dad bailed, Darren replied. There was a long pause, and then Elise said something that I'll never forget. He thinks Mark is his dad. That's all that matters for now. That sentence broke something fundamental inside me. Not because of what it revealed about the situation, but because of how cold and calculating it sounded. Like I was just a temporary placeholder, a convenience until Darren decided he was ready to be a full-time parent. I took the recording to my lawyer the very next day. He listened to the entire thing in silence, and when it was over, he looked at me and said, we're filing for emergency custody immediately. We submitted the paperwork that same afternoon, but the court system doesn't move quickly, even in emergency situations. It would take several days, maybe even weeks, before we get a hearing. And while we waited for the legal system to catch up, something else happened that forced my hand. The day before our emergency custody hearing was scheduled, I got an unexpected phone call from Elise's neighbor, a woman named Connie. We weren't close friends, but we'd waved to each other a few times when I used to mow the front yard at the old house. I know we don't really talk, she said hesitantly, but I think something's going on over there with that new guy, Darren. I asked her what she meant. I've been hearing yelling through the walls, she explained. And last night I saw Jordan outside on the front porch in his pajamas, barefoot, sitting there all alone. It was 39 degrees out, and he was there for at least 10 minutes before Elise came out to get him. She paused, then added, something's not right over there. I thought you should know. That phone call was the moment I stopped caring about playing fair or following proper legal procedures. I drove straight to Elise's house, even though it wasn't my scheduled visitation night. I knocked on the door. When she opened it, she looked startled. Mark, you can't just. Where's Jordan? I cut her off. He's asleep. In his bed? I asked pointedly. She hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicions. In his bed. He's on the couch, isn't he? She didn't answer, but her expression told me everything. I pushed past her and found my son asleep on the living room couch under a thin blanket. No pillow, no stuffed animal, just curled into himself like he was trying to disappear from the world. I picked him up carefully, and Elise started shouting, Mark, you can't just take him. I turned to face her with Jordan sleeping in my arms. Try and stop me. I drove straight to the emergency room and told them I wanted Jordan examined for signs of abuse or neglect. I explained everything that had been happening minus the recordings, the neighbors' observations, the changes in his behavior. The medical staff took me seriously and handled the situation with appropriate care. The nurse asked Jordan some gentle questions, and he told her that he didn't like Darren. The Darren was mean when mommy goes upstairs. The doctor's examination revealed old bruises on Jordan's ribs, faded but definitely there, in a pattern consistent with being grabbed or squeezed too hard. The hospital called Child Protective Services immediately. That emergency room visit was the turning point in everything. CPS conducted their own thorough investigation, interviewing Elise, interviewing Darren, and most importantly, interviewing Jordan with a trained child therapist. They obtained copies of my audio recording, the medical report from the visit, and a written statement from Connie describing what she had witnessed. Within 40-8 hours, the court granted me temporary sole custody of Jordan. Elise was allowed only supervised visits, and Darren was prohibited from having any contact with Jordan whatsoever. But even with that victory, I wasn't satisfied. I had one more goal: permanent custody and full legal recognition that I was Jordan's father in every way that mattered. My lawyer filed for complete legal and physical custody, and we also moved to terminate Darren's parental rights entirely. He had never been listed on Jordan's birth certificate, and now we had documented evidence of abuse and neglect during the brief time he'd been in Jordan's life. The court agreed to a full custody trial, which lasted 5 of the most emotionally exhausting days of my life. Elise tried to lie at first, claiming that I was overreacting and that Darren was simply strict, not abusive. But the audio recording, the emergency room report, and Connie's testimony completely destroyed that narrative. Then Child Protective Services took the witness stand. Their investigator described in clinical detail what Jordan had told therapy sessions minus how Darren had once locked him in the bathroom when he wouldn't eat his dinner, how he'd been slapped hard enough to leave marks because boys don't cry, and how he'd been made to sleep on the couch as punishment for normal childhood behaviors. Elise sat at the defendant's table throughout this testimony, her face pale as paper. She didn't look at me, didn't look at the judge, just stared down at the table in front of her. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a scared, manipulated woman who had no idea that Darren was treating Jordan badly. But then my lawyer played the audio recording minus specifically the part where she said, "He thinks Mark is his dad." That's all that matters for now. The courtroom was completely silent as those words echoed through the speakers. The judge looked directly at Elise and asked, "Did you say that?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes." "And what did you mean by that statement?" I didn't want to confuse him," she said, barely above a whisper. "And what about the bruises, the incidents on the porch, the bathroom punishment?" She didn't answer. She couldn't answer. The judge ruled entirely in my favor. I was granted full legal and physical custody of Jordan. Elise was given supervised visitation only once a month for 1 year, with the possibility of revisiting the arrangement depending on her progress in court minus mandated parenting classes and therapy. As for Darren, his parental rights were completely terminated. He was prohibited from having any contact with Jordan ever again. That part of the ruling was deeply satisfying, but it still wasn't enough for me. You see, the court decision was one thing, but I had spent 3 years being systematically lied to. 3 years raising a child I thought was mine while Elise maintained a secret that ultimately tore my entire life apart. So I decided to make sure that the people in her world knew exactly who she really was. I sent copies of all the evidence minus the photos, the letters, the paternity test, even excerpts from the audio recordings minus to her workplace. I sent them directly to her boss and to the HR department. Within a week, they fired her. It turns out that her law firm didn't want someone with an active CPS case, ongoing family court drama, and documented child neglect representing their clients. Next, I filed a motion to have Jordan's last name legally changed from Whitmore to mine. The judge approved it without hesitation. Jordan was my son now, officially and completely in every way that mattered. Then I did something I hadn't originally planned. I told Jordan the truth, but in terms that a 3-minute-old could understand and process. I sat him down one evening and said, "You know how some kids don't live with both their parents? Well, your mom made some big mistakes, and I need to make sure you're always safe. So for now, and probably for a long time, it's going to be just you and me. Is that okay?" He looked at me with those big, trusting eyes and said, "Okay, Daddy." As for Elise, the consequences of her choices kept unfolding. She lost her job, lost custody of her son, and lost her reputation in our small community. Even her own parents stopped speaking to her after CPS showed them the complete case files. Rhea and Margaret had initially blamed me for breaking up the family, but after they saw the documented evidence of what had really happened, they came to my apartment to apologize in person. Margaret actually cried, and Ray shook my hand and thanked me for protecting Jordan. They haven't spoken to Elise since. Darren moved out of state minus to Colorado. I heard money shortly after the trial ended. A few months later, I learned through mutual connections that he'd been arrested for assaulting his new girlfriend's child. It was the same pattern repeating itself. He was never a father, never wanted to be a real parent. He just wanted control, wanted to dominate and intimidate. I'll make sure he never gets anywhere near my son again. But I need to be honest about something. I made mistakes too. I trusted Elise blindly for years. I didn't ask the hard questions when things fell off. I ignored red flags for far too long, And I should have pushed harder when I first sensed that something wasn't right at that hospital. For those failures, I carry genuine guilt. But I've learned it from those mistakes. Now I wake up every single day knowing one crucial thing: Jordan is safe. He's happy. He laughs more now, sleeps better, and he's just allowed to be a kid again. I'm not just raising him anymore, minus we're healing together, building something honest and real one day at a time. Because real fathers aren't defined by DNA or biology. They're defined by what they do when everything falls apart, when the foundation crumbles, when the truth comes out and the world turns upside down. And I didn't walk away. I stayed, I fought, and I won.